That wasn't pretty. That was sloppy. It was disgusting. It was certainly filled with a bunch of moments that if you were an Alabama fan, you're sitting back and wondering, what could we have done different? But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because a win is a win in the SEC, and you're one step closer to guaranteeing your spot in the college football playoff. 22-9 victory as Alabama rolls over LSU. Let's break it all down. Welcome on into the SEC Unfiltered Postgame Show. It's Cole Thompson. Like the video, hit the ring notification, and of course, subscribe to the channel because we talk Alabama football, we talk LSU football, we talk college football daily. Download the podcast version of the show wherever you get your podcast listening systems. Follow us on the socials, link in the description, and check out all of our great work found at secunfiltered.com. And as always, we are proudly brought to you by our friends over at FANDUEL. Go visit FANDUEL.com/SECU. Maybe make a play on Alabama running away toward the national championship. Maybe make a play on Alabama missing the college football playoff altogether. Regardless, FANDUEL.com/SECU. Get started today. $300 in bonus bets when you win your first $5 bets. Sign it up. FANDUEL.com/SECU. Now, three things that we just got to get out of the way from the get-go. Number one, you never apologize for a win in the SEC. Number two, you never apologize for a win against a rival. And number three, and probably most important, you're still keeping the course on making a run towards the college football playoff. Now, with all that being said, this was not the version of Alabama that I thought was going to show up tonight. Now, that doesn't mean that it's a version that is so bad to where we can't believe that the future is going to be promising. But it was one to where it was very underwhelming. Yes, Ty Simpson threw for 277 yards. Yes, Ty Simpson was able to connect deep downfield on several shots. That ended up being kind of the difference in this game between him and Garrett Nussmeier and later Michael Van Buren. But ultimately, this was not a good offensive game plan for Alabama. And credit where credit's due. LSU knew that if they were able to make Alabama one-dimensional, things would at least get interesting. And lo and behold, they did. 26 carries, 56 yards on the ground, 2.2 yards per play. Ty Simpson had the longest run of the night of 17 yards. And outside of that, it was really nothing. It was minute when it came to the overall offensive personnel. It was very lackluster play designs. You didn't really have anything that was able to go move on the ground. Therefore, this became an Alabama shootout where you had to trust the passing attack. And ultimately, trusting the passing attack in this game was something that I thought was going to be a very big fault. I remember saying in the preview earlier this week that Alabama was going to have to trust. I mean, if LSU want to win this game, they were going to have to make Alabama run the football. And for the most part, they tried to. But what happened was that when you had to get Ty Simpson to throw the football downfield, he eventually started to find a little bit of a rhythm. Now, don't get me wrong. It wasn't pretty. 21 of 35, 277 yards, one touchdown pass, no turnovers. So you'll take that with the win when it comes to the interception standpoint. But still, LSU came out swinging. LSU had a good defensive game plan to kind of slow Alabama and make them feel like that they were playing with house money. They weren't able to capitalize. They had to rely on field goals. They had to rely on 3-and-out drives. They had to punt at midfield. They got that big fourth down stop in the first quarter. Little things like that went so far in favor of LSU to kind of keep pace with Alabama. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the problem was that Alabama never was able to put its foot completely on the gas and be able to run away. 20-9 victory. You're not going to apologize for that, and you got to take that as a massive win. But still, this was one of those games where when you look back at yourself and you ask, what went wrong from the play design, from the overall offensive line approach, and credit. I remember in the preview that Alabama was going to face off against a team that was going to be well prepared because not only did they have a bye week, but they want to show on up and show out. They want to make this a statement kind of victory, or at least a statement have a game that where, from a roster composite standpoint, it looked like LSU was going to be one of those teams that was making enough of a run to where you could believe things were trending upward. And they had their moments, especially in the first half. They kept this thing very close. They were able to force a lot of 3-and-outs. They forced a turnover on downs. They got a fumble. They only gave up one field goal. And then eventually you saw them kind of pull away in the second half where it was 17-3. And yes, Alabama was eventually able to get its footing underneath it with the big-time touchdown pass downfield of Ryan Williams. But this was not a good offensive game plan, I think, from Alabama in the standpoint of what you expect. They were average on third down. They were very average when it came to overall fourth down conversions. But they still were able to manage with 344 yards. And that was the consistency of what you saw with Ty Simpson, being able to build a rapport and an identity with the passing attack, whether it was to Jeremy Bernard, or whether it was to Ryan Williams or Josh Sevis, or whatever you had when you got to Latsier Brooks, who had 4 catches for 78 yards. Alabama averaged 13.3 yards per play. They had 6 plays of over 15 yards downfield. And ultimately, that was a pretty big deciding factor to be able to at least set the tone against a secondary that was very good going into this game. So Alabama wins this football game. What does that mean moving forward? They're going to have to look at the film and kind of, I would say, throw it to the wayside. This is not one of those games where you want to look back and say, here's what we did right. Instead, you want to look at it and go, here's where we had so many mental mistakes and what we need to correct before we face off against Oklahoma, before we face off against Auburn to close out the season. Now, the good news is that Alabama now is sitting in a position where all they have to do is win one more game. Could be against Oklahoma, could be against Auburn. As long as they do that, they're going to be sitting at 10-2, 1 conference loss. They will be in Atlanta playing for an SEC title. Year 2 underneath Kalen DeBoer. And again, Kalen DeBoer does not get enough credit for what he's been able to accomplish in his early times in Tuscaloosa because of last season, he lost those games against unranked opponents. This season, now he's been able to kind of turn the tide and put the team in a position to where they're able to make sure that the fundamental mistakes of any first-year staff doesn't come back to bite them and put them in a position to where it is win out or we're screwed. That's where Alabama is. You got a game against Oklahoma, then Eastern Illinois, then Auburn in the Iron Bowl. As long as you do that, that's a pretty good formula. Now, the problem is the offensive performance that we saw tonight is not going to be good enough to face off against Oklahoma. Oklahoma is going to be coming off of a bye week. Oklahoma has a great defensive line, and Oklahoma is able to put pressure on a quarterback into making multiple mental mistakes that eventually could lead to them capitalizing and putting themselves inside the red zone territory that will allow them to strike and score. So this is going to be one of those games where you look back and you ask yourself, what went so wrong to where a team like LSU, who benched their potential Heisman preseason favorite quarterback, was not able to get the ball rolling? That's what you're taking away from this game. At least if I'm an Alabama fan, or at least if I'm an Alabama coach, I'm looking at this is what went wrong. This is what we need to fix. And as long as we do that, we'll be in a good spot going into next week's matchup. But if we don't fix it, and this is what we see from bad offensive excommunication when it comes to the line, overall mistakes when it comes to deep shots downfield, the inability to trust our rushing attack, little things like that, that we're going to be in a position where things go south and everything and anything is on the horizon, including an upset win by Oklahoma, and now a must-win when we go into Jordan-Hare Stadium, where an Auburn team that is looking to secure a signature win after losing in Nashville this weekend certainly feels like it's in the works. Those things like that will go a long way. Now, for LSU standpoint, I know there's going to be a lot of people asking, hey, why did they go to Michael Van Buren? Why was Garrett Nussmeier benched and not put back in the game? Well, let's look at it from the perspective of Frank Wilson, because I had the same thought process. I watched as we saw 18 lead the field. And my first thought was, this feels wrong. Because there's a lot of faults that right now when you look at LSU, whether it be the offensive line, the inconsistency at the wide receiver position, countless miscues when it comes to play calling, all things that really kind of hinder the success of Garrett Nussmeier. But then I remember that Frank Wilson right now is trying to gain head coaching status. Frank Wilson is trying to prove that he is the right guy to lead LSU in the future. The future does not include Garrett Nussmeier. The future does not include number 18 leading the charge in 2026. He's going to be off in the NFL or in the XFL or whatever league wants to pick him on up. I'm not ready to go that far at this point. And you have to look toward what will be the move that will turn the tide and put you in a better position. Garrett Nussmeier was not able to move the football whatsoever through the air. 18-21, 121 passing yards, a lot of dink and dunk plays, a lot of 4 and outs, a lot of 5 plays, and it ended up being a negative. And Michael Van Buren, with his mobility and with the expectations of him being potentially the option after this season, you got to ask yourself, Well, if I'm Frank Wilson, what's going to be the thing that I want to hold on to? Trusting the quarterback that put us in this position, whether or not it was all his fault because there were multiple issues with the offensive line, multiple issues trusting the rushing attack, the inability to build any consistency in the passing game, or do I want to turn to the kid that may be the reason why we could at least make this thing interesting? Maybe throwing in the relief pitcher when we're in the fourth inning ends up being the reason why we win the World Series. That's it for Frank Wilson. So, as much as I disagreed with the position of moving off of Garrett Nussmeier in this game, Michael Van Buren gave LSU a better shot. Doesn't mean it was a great performance, but it gave him a better shot. 5'11 passing. He also had, 6 carries for, at one point, it was like 19 yards. And then because of the sack total, he got back to 1 yard. But Alabama's defense stepped on up. Alabama's defense made LSU basically obsolete on the ground. And this really came down to who was the better passer. And while Ty Simpson wasn't great tonight, he was at least better than what you had with the two that were working in favor of LSU standpoint. And LSU, what really hindered their success had nothing to do with the passing attack or Alabama being able to beat after them. It was the self-inflicted wounds. I mean, how many times do you look back and say a false start or a holding penalty or a block in the back or little things like that, face mask call, eventually hinder the success of LSU to be able to move the ball at any standpoint? LSU finished with 10 penalties for 74 yards. Alabama had 1 false start and 1 face mask call. And usually I have been very, very much in the proponent of blaming Alabama for having negative penalties, multiple issues that ultimately put themselves in a position to where they shoot themselves in the foot. And that really wasn't the case tonight. Like, Alabama did not have a good offensive or defensive game plan, but for the most part, Alabama was able to play within its parameters, and they made plays as much as possible. LSU just constantly put itself behind the sticks even further than what Alabama was able to do. And then Alabama, again, they had a great defensive game plan, at least for the most part in the second half. 7 tackles for losses, 3 sacks in the night. I mean, you got to give a lot of credit to what you saw with Deontay Lawson and Justin Jefferson. Nakai Hill-Green had multiple big-time plays. You had Yancey Pierre showing up, 2 sacks on the night. Literally, all the things that you want to see that had been a hindrance for Alabama kind of showed on up. Now, where do these teams go moving forward? If Alabama plays the way they played tonight, it is not going to be good enough to be able to beat Oklahoma. And it certainly is going to lead into a position to where there are multiple moments where you look back at this game and say, this was the beginning of the end of where we kind of realized Alabama was not built to win a national title. Now, that doesn't mean that you're not good enough to go to a college football playoff or maybe even compete in the SEC championship game, but it wasn't an overall solid performance to where you believe that Alabama's offense is great. Ty Simpson was not perfect tonight. He missed multiple open receivers downfield. The offensive line was dreadful protecting him. And this is where a team like Oklahoma can use this as advantages to take over a game next week in Tuscaloosa. If Alabama looks that way against Oklahoma's defensive line, Oklahoma's not only winning this game, Oklahoma's going to go in there and they're going to manhandle Alabama. So you got to remember that this is one of those games to where if you can turn the corner and use this as an advantage of, hey, we did not have our A-plus performance tonight, but we still won and covered the spread of 9.5 with a C-minus performance. That shows how good we actually are, and we can use this as a learning material to make sure that we don't have these type of games moving forward when we face off against Oklahoma or we face off against Ole Miss in the college football playoff or Texas A&M in the SEC championship. This can be our reason to why things are trending upward and we're not going to be as bad as advertised. So I'm using this film, if I'm an Alabama fan, as this is what not to do when taking on quality opponents. But I'm also using this as a moment of, hey, we get one. We get one bad game, and eventually it won't catch up with us. That's where we are. For LSU at this point, I think you realize that this was a lost season. And unfortunately, the writing's on the wall. Things went south immediately from the second that after that 1-0 start, you weren't able to find any identity on the ground. You weren't able to move the football efficiently through the air. As good as your defense played tonight, 4 tackles, 1 sack, you had a couple of big-time pass breakups. You forced, 2 one turnover. You probably should have had two. It ultimately wasn't just your season. You were so far late behind this line. It was horrendous at times. And again, the self-inflicted wounds of what we saw from LSU tonight with the careless penalties, with the holding calls, with how bad the offensive line looked, it ultimately led to your demise. And that's something that whoever is the next head coach that comes on in there needs to make a priority. Because it's LSU. LSU should not be losing football games to anybody. Not Alabama, anybody. Because of how bad the offensive line is able to protect its quarterback. Because of how bad the inability you're able to give your quarterback time to make throws downfield efficiently. For how horrendous this team was able to not be able to withstand some big-time plays. You relied so heavily on the explosives just to be put into a position to where you could kick field goals that ultimately led to your ultimate demise. And every single drive, it felt like one play was such a positive, and the next play you were taking a shot off and 15 yards behind you because of you had the negation and the penalties. It's not a well-coached team. And ultimately, that's the sign of where this program is right now. LSU was a team that I had a lot of hope going into this season because if I figured you went out, you spent money, you put a lot of emphasis in the transfer portal, but the culture is ultimately what's going to define who you are as a program. Look at Texas Tech today. Texas Tech, and I get it, it's SEC versus Big 12. Texas Tech had a dominant performance against BYU. BYU came into this game undefeated. BYU looked lost. They were a high school level offense and a defense that was probably a junior varsity college level team. And the reason why they looked that way is because of Texas Tech had a culture that was so well prepared for this matchup. They didn't have the self-inflicting wounds. They didn't shoot themselves in the foot every fourth down. They didn't put themselves behind the sticks and make it 3rd and 15 when it should have been 3rd and 6. And that's a culture thing. That's something that Joe McGuire has been able to build over the last 2 years of equity. And remember, LSU and Texas Tech both were in a position where they went out in the transfer portal and brought in countless names. They brought in offensive linemen, defensive linemen. They said, we're going to build this team to be better than what it was a season ago, and we're going to trust the names that are coming on back in as a foundation standpoint. One team has benefited off it. Texas Tech is a top 10 defense in college football. They look like they can go toe-to-toe with any bottom dweller in any major conference, and they're probably going to make a run toward the college football playoffs semifinals, if not further. They feel like that everything is building towards, with the momentum right now, like they could go on a run and actually win the whole damn thing. And LSU doesn't. They're sitting at 5-4 going into the final 3 weeks of the regular season. Do you want to know why? It's a culture standpoint. So whoever is the next head coach that comes on into Baton Rouge next season not only has to rewrite the entire culture and the premise of where this team is, offensively, defensively, workout regimen, film study, you got to make sure that you bring in players that understand what you want. Because it felt like tonight that it was just going through the motions. And Michael Van Buren was able to do some things better than Garrett Nussmeier. But ultimately, you made the move because of Frank Wilson realized, I'm not going to be able to win or guarantee that I'm going to be back next year if I play 18. So let's turn to 11 and see if this is the spark plug that we can utilize to put us in a better position to where we can strike. And it wasn't. And I think that most people knew that. But ultimately, when you kind of are in a lost season, that's where you turn to. And that was what we saw tonight. So it's not a negative against LSU. It just is the harsh reality of where the Tigers are and where Alabama is. I think that Alabama at this point can probably put itself into a position to where you knew that after tonight, just win one more. Win against Auburn, win against Oklahoma. You're guaranteed a spot in the college football playoff. And I would probably say you're guaranteed a spot in Atlanta. If you win next Saturday, even if it's like a 19-14 win, you're still in the playoff. And at that point, you can afford to lose one game because if you would have had at least multiple wins in conference play and you would have only had one conference loss to where, 10-2 doesn't look good on the resume, but it looks better because of it's 7-1 in conference play. But you don't want to worry about that. Use this game as the sign of resistance of where you can get back to of this was terrible. This is what we need to improve on. This is where if we play our worst version of football, we will find a way to lose to inferior teams again. And Oklahoma can be that team, and Auburn can be that team. Eastern Illinois can't be that team, but still, you don't want to do that before you go into the college football playoff. As for LSU, again, you got matchups to close out the season against Arkansas and against Oklahoma. Yeah, you're going to make the bowl game because you probably should win at least one. I don't know where that one comes to. But a win's a win, a loss, kind of the bottom line. We can go ahead and break this all down more tomorrow when we do Sunday Fun Day. Like the video, hit the ring notification. Make sure you subscribe to the channel right here on SEC Unfiltered. Before we get on out of here, let me tell you about my friends over at FanDuel. FanDuel.com is giving you first player props right now on any major play currently in college football. So if you want to go ahead and bet on Alabama to win the national title, if you want to bet on Georgia after what we saw today, Vanderbilt, how about Vandy staying alive, finding a way to respond against Auburn? They're still very much in the hunt for the college football playoff. If you want to make a play on them going to the postseason, simply sign up at FanDuel.com/SECU. You will get $300 in bonus bets when you win your first $5 bet. The app is simple. It's free. It's easy to use. You can use same-game parlays, whatever tickles your fancy. Sign up today at FanDuel.com/SECU. Get started. $300 in bonus bets when you win your first $5 bet. And it's not just on college football. You can bet on the NBA season, the NHL season. College basketball is in full swing. The NBA, the official betting partner of FanDuel, is ready to give you money. The only question is, are you ready to join? Sign up today. FanDuel.com/SECU. All right, final score. We're going to end it here. Be back tomorrow, Sunday Fun Day. We're going to break down every single matchup from the SEC. Kentucky, what's going to be the game plan moving forward when it comes to Mark Stoops? Hey, Auburn, you showed some life. Is DJ Durkin the right guy to lead the team into the future? What are we going to make of the future of what we see with Mizzou now that they are out of the college football playoff race? And Texas A&M, you're 9-0. 84 jokes are officially over. Like, that is a done deal. All that and more on Sunday Fun Day. So don't miss tomorrow's show. Make sure that you sign up right here. Like the video, hit the ring notifications, subscribe to the channel. We'll be back tomorrow at 8 p.m. I'm Cole Thompson. Final score, Alabama 20, LSU 9. One team is an inch closer to guaranteeing its spot in the college football playoff. And the other team, you got to hit reset in a lot of ways, and it's not just when it comes to quarterback. It is on the entire offensive personnel, and honestly, the defense, not that far behind. Who's going to be the next head coach? That's a question that I don't even think they know the answer to. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Have a good rest of your night. Peace.